Operators of the Hope House in Bangor announced last year they would have to close the facility if they couldn't find a partner to run the emergency shelter. Penobscot Community Healthcare estimates an $800,000 operating loss this year.
Now they and other low-barrier shelters across Maine are asking for the state's help to keep them afloat. Kadichi Lawrence has more from Augusta.
Lawmakers on the Housing Committee heard testimony on legislation seeking to provide financial supports for homeless shelters.
The people that need these services are the ones bearing the brunt of these simultaneous crises.
What we do know is that our public lands have become tent cities. What we do know is that our unhoused population is growing, in dire need of services that our municipality is struggling to provide.
Lori Dwyer is the president and CEO of the Penobscot Community Health Care, the organization that runs Hope House, which is on the verge of closing.
The announcement we made in December was that if we do not find a sustainable long-term funding solution, we will have to close by October or transfer to a partner organization.
Currently, there are 5 low-barrier shelters in the state, including Hope House.
Low-barrier shelter is required by state law to accept anyone, regardless of any particular status, whether they're sober, whether they have a criminal history, whether they're registered on the sex offender registry, any of those barriers that may keep people out of other shelters.
She says closing the shelter would be devastating to the community, but they need help to continue to serve the people in need.
People with very serious chronic medical conditions. We have an aging population. We have people who have confronted severe mental illness, who have substance use disorder. When you put those together, it really requires a level of support and trust building and relationship building and navigation with highly trained and professional staff.
Dwyer says they look to the legislature to pass the bill that would help not just the Hope House, but other low-barrier shelters that are struggling financially.
So the collective deficit of the 5 low-barrier shelters is almost $4 million. We're asking the state through this bill, LD 2138, to provide $2.5 million in operating funds. So that would get us just over 60% of the way towards closing that gap that we're collectively experiencing.
Kadichi Lawrence, WABI TV 5 News, Augusta.